Scullion coming in for third. What a finish. It was predicted by multiple people on our messages. He's coming in hard. He's having a look back. He's digging in. This is a great performance. One of the best runs of Stephen Scullion's career.
Yeah, we'll get an idea of the finish time for him there in a moment as soon as he crosses the line. But he's absolutely flying there. He's going to finish third and has finished third in the Irish Life Dublin Marathon.
So I think within the running community now, there's this idea that because of Supershoes, marathon recovery, I guess, is much easier, much quicker. And the sort of trending patterns is that a lot of athletes are jumping back into races perhaps way sooner than they otherwise would have. And what I really want to sort of nail down today is that yes, there is sort of some facts to that. And if you're wearing Supershoes, the recovery period will be quicker. But I don't know that that means you should always just be jumping straight back into races. And so I want to sort of go through what I sort of have learned over, 20 years of doing this, running under 2:12 for the marathon 3 times, running 2:09 once, but also a lot of not very good marathons, which often came off the back of assuming that Supershoes make the word wonderful and assuming that I could just jump straight back into training and head first into another marathon. And so what I'd love to sort of happen today is that you sort of get some insight into that recovery period, you learn from some of my mistakes, and then you sort of know what to actually do after a marathon before jumping into sort of the next big goal race. But let's get stuck in. If I could ask one thing from you, it would be completely free. Like, subscribe, comment below. It really helps the channel. If you'd like, you can also check out 262clo.com. That's a brand I started. We're running a 15% sale today. Team 262 at checkout will get you 15% off, but let's jump back to the video. So the first thing to address is, of course, Supershoes have made a difference. They are more generous in the sort of train and build up in terms of recovery, but then it's also much easier on race day from your muscles don't beat up the way they once upon a time did before Supershoes. And if you've raced a marathon without Supershoes and now you've done one in Supershoes, you'll realize that the sort of calf damage, quad damage to the muscles in general is much less. And so that's why people are almost jumping straight back into training that afternoon, believe it or not, but then often the next day, perhaps showing up to a group session a couple of days later. And it's not that I think that's a mistake, but that's something that we're going to kind of get into. So the fact of the matter is, your muscle damage post-marathon will certainly be less than what it used to be, but that's not necessarily then permission to, jump straight back into the training. The other thing that you have to bear in mind, that every sort of marathon is going to be different. And one of the sort of reasons behind that is because your sort of like recovery time is what you could call it. It's also going to be connected to how difficult your training build-up was, how well the build-up went, and then also how well did race day go. So what I mean by that is if you have a really great training build-up, you can end up, first of all, that training build-up takes way more out of your body throughout the entire build-up, so there's a bit of sort of residual fatigue already building. But normally with a really good training build-up, you can end up racing much harder on race day than you otherwise would have without a good training build-up. And so often the better you race and the better your training build-up went, the more recovery time you're going to have to sort of devote before your body's going to be in a place to sort of crack on again. And we're not talking about your body being in a place to manage a 6-mile run, a 10K run. What we're talking about here is, I would hope that every marathon you do, you want to get better with each marathon. And so what we're talking about here is, when is your body ready to be in a position to train again and your next races go better and ultimately your next marathon go better than the previous one. You're not trying to just get recovered to handle a 10K run. So the other alternative is that, your marathon race day potentially didn't go the way you wanted it to, and perhaps you sort of had a lot of interruptions within the build-up, and that's fairly natural. That's, work life, family life, high stress. Maybe the training just didn't go the way you wanted it. Maybe you sort of got sick in the build-up. And so something that you're looking at is that your recovery time might be less because things didn't go that great. And so if you haven't sort of done a full training block, and it meant on race day you only ran at maybe like 80 to 85% of your best, that means that the sort of total muscle damage will be much lower for you than it might be for somebody that had a really great build-up plus a really great race day, and then their fatigue's going to be really high. Your fatigue might kind of be surface level because yes, you're going to be tired from running 26.2 miles. We always will be. But you're not going to be as fatigued underneath the sort of like surface because perhaps you didn't do a full training build up and you didn't extract the absolute most out of yourself on race day. And so as you can see, it's definitely a combination of how did my training build up go? Did I maximize the training? Did I get it all done? Plus my race result, how sort of race day went, how much did I extract out of my body? That's sort of simple maths. A plus B equals C. And so now that you've sort of like possibly got an answer for C, you can also look at it from a perspective of you had a great build up, but you didn't have a great race day. That often means that it might be from like mile 17, 18. You were certainly working hard psychologically, but you potentially weren't breaking the muscles down as much as you would have if you had a really great race day. It's on those really great race days that you really can dig deep, but it means that you push your body physically to, you know, really sort of dark places, and then the recovery time can also be that little bit longer. So you need to sort of weigh up your A plus B equals C in terms of training build up, race day, and that's sort of a collection for your fatigue from a physical perspective. Then you can sort of bear in mind the race. Sometimes like courses like Boston or hilly marathons, they might beat you up a little bit more because of the sort of pounding on the legs. But that's your sort of like physical perspective. And now we're going to dive into sort of like the psychological aspect. So when it comes to the sort of psychology, like this is the part that nobody can sort of like quantify for each sort of person. But then also, how can you quantify? Like, yes, Supershoes are helping the body sort of physically, and that's definitely sort of speeding up that process. But I think that people forget that no matter how well the race goes, or even if it doesn't go well, you're still psychologically very tired. It's very, very tiring aiming for something for such a long time and then processing how did it go, even if it went really well. But then sometimes when it doesn't go as well as you wanted, there's still sort of like a psychological processing period that you must allow to happen. And so I don't really have an A plus B equals C for this scenario because there's no way to quantify. A race that goes really well can be extremely fatiguing on the psychology, and it can often then push you to sort of jump into things quicker than you otherwise would have, or it can have the opposite effect and you sort of feel like you've arrived and you're this amazing athlete and now you're at the top and life's wonderful, and then you can almost get complacent on the other side and then things don't go as well because you were really hungry for this big goal, but now that you've achieved it, the hunger isn't the same on the other side. Or you can do the, I'm gonna not contradict myself, but you can then be in the opposite position of the sort of underdog and the race didn't go the way you wanted it to. And so now you're kind of like, well, you know, fuck the recovery period. I'm not giving my body time to rest. That was shit. I'm better than that. I'm gonna enter another marathon. I'm gonna train harder. I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna do all of the stuff that I wasn't doing. And you jump straight back into it and you never really took a moment to like let the dust settle, you could call it, and just take that little bit of time that was necessary. No matter how well or didn't, you know, well the race didn't go, you need to take that time. And that time is so important because if you get into the routine of, you know, per race, jump straight back in, per race, jump straight back in, you never really teach yourself the consequences of maybe not making some really great decisions in your build-up. So if the race didn't go well because you were sloppy with nutrition, sloppy with recovery, you didn't follow the plan, you didn't stick to the basics and do the stuff that you normally do, you were shit with your sleep and you didn't prioritize hydration, and then you don't, it's not that you're punishing yourself at the end of that not going well by taking, you know, maybe like a week easy or 2 weeks easy, and we'll get to that. But if you jump straight back in, there's no consequence for the almost per showing in that application to training because you just jump straight back in and you're like, well, I'll just do this next one and I'll jump onto that. But you almost need to punish yourself from a perspective of take that time, take a week or two to think about it, take some time to realize, shit, there's things I should have done better. And that's going to make you much hungrier in the next build up to get it right because you know that you take that time. There's a little bit of a layoff period, and there has to be that layoff period or you'll never learn the consequences of almost those poor choices within the build-up. Okay, so you've got your body physically, you've obviously got your emotions. Both take similar, I think, times to recover. Body physically, everyone's going to be completely different, and the Supershoes have definitely changed this. But where I'm sort of going to go with this is, the way to know that your body is physically recovered is that I have a thing on 262clo.com. You can check it out. It's called a MOT test for runners. It's free. It's in the sort of plans section, and I do suggest that you go download that. But basically, you've got where was my body at pre-marathon, and then you need to have sort of like checkpoints, like where was my flexibility at, where was my strength at, if I did like a stand and jump or I did some plyometrics, where was that sort of side of things back. And so instead of waking up and thinking, oh yeah, like my muscle soreness isn't really there, it's not too bad, you have some factual checks that you can do, which might be like, it might sound really silly now, but you might be doing like a hamstring stretch and you realize that you went from being able to touch your toes to you can only sort of get to your shin. And that's factually telling you that your body physically isn't back to where it needs to be prior to the marathon. There's still some damage going on there. The reason you're sort of limited is because you've broke your muscles down, and then that's going to be something that you're going to have to work on. And so I like to have like factual data, which just is in the form of like little bits of strength testing, how many calf raises you can do. It's all in this sort of MOT test, but how many calf raises you can do, how many sort of like might be like walking lunges or lunges can you do. And you've got this like factual data that you're going to rely on, and you're going to use this in the sort of marathon build-up. You're going to test it prior, and then like sort of maybe like after 10 days, 2 weeks, you can redo a little test like that. And then you're in a position of, well, hey, I don't sort of have the muscle soreness that I had. I also did my sort of like little tests for the flexibility. I did my little sort of like strength tests. I also did a very low level fitness test, and there wasn't soreness when I was doing it. And then way more importantly, if you're doing like, pretend you do like 3 times a mile as a little fitness test, and you do 1 mile slower than marathon pace, 1 mile at marathon pace, 1 mile a little bit quicker. If you find you're sore that next day, you weren't recovered, right? Because 3 times a mile, barely around the sort of marathon-y pace, shouldn't be making you sore the next day. So if you're still sore, that means that there's residual fatigue still in the body physically from the marathon. And so when I tried to make the Olympics, I did Dublin Marathon, and the goal was to be able to bounce back really quickly and go to Valencia Marathon. And how I knew I wasn't ready was when I started to do little sessions again. It was how tired I was after doing like maybe 1 5K rep at a pace I had just ran for 42K. So that was an obvious sign and a factual sign you're not ready yet. You're not there yet. So that's really important to have some of these pre-stroke post. Don't sort of think just because you wore those Supershoes that your muscles aren't going to be pretty abused. What happens in the marathon is those muscles deteriorate. So you go into the marathon full strength, full taper, ready to go. You come out of the marathon with a lack of strength, a lack of flexibility. And then as time goes by that you're trying to sort of recover, fitness drops also. But fitness will drop at first because the sort of strength is down and your flexibility's down, so your efficiency's down, and your sort of like stride sort of strength is down. So if you raced pretty soon after, it wouldn't be fitness would make your race worse. It would be that strength is down and likely you're running economy because your sort of like flexibility might have sort of gone to shit. So that's really important that you're leaning on factual data rather than just sort of making assumptions or, thinking that just because the muscles feel a certain way that now suddenly they're ready to train again. And also you're not letting emotions drive those decisions, because it's kind of like, no, I have factual data here to say that I'm recovered, so this has nothing to do with if I ran well or didn't run well. That's a really simple way to differentiate between I'm letting emotions drive these decisions and actually I'm just making really logical decisions. And that's super, super important. So now that we kind of come on to those, the emotions that are involved, the recovery time is going to be completely different for everybody. But it's equally as important to the physical that you're in an emotional state to sort of train again, because you can almost be like deflated, even if you run really well post-marathon. And I can tell you that to run, you know, a better marathon in that sort of next race, and you want it to go better than anything has ever gone before, you need the body physically, but also emotionally, to be ready to handle the likes of the build-up that is going to create that success on race day. And so if you're constantly rushing that process of recovery and you're not giving yourself the time, you're going to go into that next build-up, and instead of being like raring to go, hungry and willing to sort of do all the work that's going to create a big result, you're going into that next training build-up almost a bit sloppy. And that's where the complacency comes in. And I don't know how many times I went from running an excellent race like 209 or 211 and podium and all this fancy stuff to suddenly I race like shit because I just wasn't at the races, you know? I was doing the training, I was ticking the boxes, but I wasn't really showing up in a sort of like mindset of, I'm ready for this, I want this, I'll do what it takes. And so that's the emotional sort of recovery period that you need that hunger to come back. And that's why I think when people rush that process of, I just need to get back training, don't sort of rush that process because psychologically it's really good for you to get back to training. You can swim, you can bike, you can do some active recovery. So important. I really want you looking after that psychology, but I don't want you penciling in a race yet. I don't want you penciling in the next marathon because you're sort of like, ego's like raring to go again and your enthusiasm raring to go again. You might not be there yet. So that's why you sort of take those like at least sort of 2 weeks. It's not 2 weeks full rest. I'm not going to tell you how long full rest to take. That is up to you. But I would like you to take at least probably 5 days off running completely. And that might then involve some walking, some cross training, some swimming, that sort of stuff. And that then might help the psychology stay in a good place. And it'll make you be a little bit more patient with your body physically, because most of the time you're rushing that recovery period just because psychologically it's really tough to go from some training, which is brilliant for your mental health, to zero training. And so why don't you include some of that active rest into your marathon recovery? And that's what's going to help you stop getting antsy to get out the door and do some training to keep the head right. And you'll let that recovery process happen and take the time that it sort of deserves. So you might find that sort of like after 5 to 7 days, you've done that sort of like active rest stuff, you've went on a few walks, and then you might be ready to try a little bit of running. And that's when this stuff becomes really important. That's when you're checking that flexibility, you're checking that sort of physical strength stuff. You're trying to bring your physical strength back to 100%, and you're trying to bring that flexibility back to sort of 100%. Your own baselines, if you could never touch your toes, well then you don't need to be able to touch your toes post-race. But you're trying to bring it back to baseline, and you're trying to find symmetry in the left side and the right side. And that's then going to help your next marathon by a lot. That at the very least, you're going into that next sort of like hopefully base period of training in a really good spot and not heading into it an emotional wreck. You want to go into that next base period of training to get ready for that next marathon. You want to be recovered physically. You want to be recovered emotionally, psychologically. Do not go into it an emotional wreck or trying to prove something, or you end up sort of making silly choices. Take that bit of time, then do the likes of this sort of like strength testing, flexibility testing, know that you're in a great place, then get stuck into some base training. And actually you should be working on that sort of base stuff all the way sort of through maybe the next sort of 4, 6, 8 weeks. And that's what's going to put you in a really good spot prior to your next marathon build-up, that you've topped those sort of 5K fitness up, that's sort of like almost like speed and power. You've got that back to a really good place, or maybe it's best place ever. And then you're in such a strong position to go on and have success in your sort of next marathon versus, you know, coming off this one emotionally, going into the next one really tired, maybe not sort of doing the base work. And then what makes you think that you deserve a better result in the next marathon? If you honestly ask yourself that, why do I deserve a better result in this marathon? Did I do things right, or did I let my emotions drive these sort of decisions? So you've got yourself to, you know, probably around like day 14, day 15, maybe into that sort of third week. Hopefully you've passed, you know, those sort of like flexibility tests, and your flexibility test is a good way, strength testing is in a good way. Now you're ready to enter that base plan. I have a free base plan. Please check it out, 262clue.com. People have raved about it. They really like it. It's going to give you routine. It's going to give you structure, and you should be using that before each of your marathons for sure. But once you've sort of passed those little phases, you've jumped into your base plan, now you're working on your 5K fitness, your 10K fitness, when they start to go well, now you're ready to start thinking what marathon might make sense in future. And that might have took you 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks and not 3, 4, 5 hours post-race. Please start doing this stuff properly. At least give yourself a chance for your next marathon to go really well. Treat yourself like a professional. So much free stuff now on 262clo.com. You know, I put sort of fuel guides in there, the MOT test in there, the base plan in there. Please check that stuff out. We're also running a sale, 15% off. That will end today, so hopefully I get this posted today. The discount code is TEAM262. And well done, everybody. I hope your marathons went great, and hopefully I'll start posting that a little bit more on YouTube. But take care.